By now, we know that the Aprilia RS 457 is an awesome little thing on the racetrack. If you want a track-appropriate motorcycle for less than 5 lakh rupees, it does not get better than this. But real life happens on the street, and this bike's odometer currently reads 741 kilometers. Over the last week or so, I have set most of those miles in and around Mumbai, and I know this bike really well now. So in this video, we're going to talk about the living with aspect. What's the fuel efficiency like? How hot does it get? How easy is it to live with? So many questions. But I want to start with what got me the most excited, the performance. Very simply put, this is now the fastest made in India motorcycle we have ever tested. I tested the motorcycle, I weigh about 80 kilos in gear, and I managed a 4.99 second 0 to 100 run, the first made in India bike under 5 seconds. Someone lighter than me, maybe a little more skilled, could maybe get this bike even quicker, but that is a really quick time. Only one new motorcycle comes close, it's the new Gen 390 Duke, that is about 5.2 seconds, but this is a little quicker. Not just in acceleration, but also in the roll-on figures. For those of you interested in top speed, you will see a speedo indicated speed of somewhere between 180 to 190 kilometers per hour. So this is a really quick motorcycle, and it manages to do that while also sounding really good. I know we're in the studio, the sound is better in here, but believe me, this is a really nice sounding bike out on the street. And the nice part is that it sounds nice everywhere, not just at low RPMs, not just at high RPMs, pretty much any riding speed, you will be treated to that nice deep sound. There is no question then that this is a really fun and exciting motorcycle, but what about living with it? What about life in the city? Well, I have spent literally hundreds of kilometers riding it through the city in bad traffic, bad roads, good roads. There's quite a lot of good stuff going on here. The first very nice thing is that this is a super light clutch, lighter than anything in the segment, and I mean some commuter bikes are that light, but the nice thing is that this clutch still has feel, it's not just mushy, so it's nice to use and it also gives you a bit of feedback. The second thing, and I probably want to sit for this, is that the turning radius itself is not bad, but if you have gloves on especially, you will find that your hand can get slightly pinched here. It doesn't trap your hand and injure you, but you will get this motion and that can sometimes put you off when you're taking a turn. So you have to be aware that your hands will touch the wide fuel tank. Then there's the heat management. Now this is a big question. Every motorcycle that comes out, new engine, new bodywork, we want to know how hot it gets. This bike, I have gotten stuck in really heavy traffic, peak afternoon heat, almost 40 degrees, miserable weather. The bike gets warm, you feel some heat radiating all around, but there are no hot air blasts, and the cooling system actually keeps everything under control. I haven't got a single high temperature warning, no matter where we got this bike stuck, and that is a very nice thing. Finally, another thing I really like is the fueling in the city. It's very smooth, there's no hunting, even at low RPMs. 1500 RPM onwards, the engine is smooth and it drives away very smoothly. Throttle response is also very nice. There are 3 riding modes. The only difference between the modes is the throttle response. Some people do find sport to be a bit too sharp. You can turn it down to rain or eco, and that does dull it down and make the bike a little more rideable. But that general low speed fueling is very nice, and that again makes this a nicer bike to ride in the city. So that's the positive aspects of this motorcycle in the city. There are a couple of negatives as well. One of them is that its fuel efficiency is surprisingly low in the city. We did our tests where we tank it up, we run about 40 kilometers riding gently along with city traffic speed, not much slower, not much faster than anybody else. And in those conditions, this bike only returned 17 kpl, which I was surprised by. I thought it would be more. My theory behind this, and I could be wrong, is that the fuel efficiency is low because of that nice low speed fueling. It feels like Aprilia is giving the engine a little more fuel to give you that smooth riding experience. Interestingly, I realized that with the 13-liter tank full, with some brisk riding, not very fast, not slow at all either, I managed to get a range of about 220 to 30 kilometers, which really isn't bad. So while the number on paper looks bad in the city, the realistic range isn't bad. And in our highway test, the number improved significantly, just over 30 kpl, but there too, it's very cautious riding in our tests, about 80-85 kph. So I think the realistic figure you're looking at here with good highway touring, things like that, is about 25 kpl, and that's perfectly acceptable. Highway performance is really good as well, and 100 kilometers per hour is super relaxed at below 5000 RPM. The engine even feels calm at speeds up to 130 odd kilometers per hour. The excellent torque also makes this a very effortless motor on the highway, and it's really flexible and tractable at city speeds as well. Vibrations only creep in closer to the red line, and you'll almost never experience them in most normal riding scenarios. This really will be a superb engine in future motorcycles on this platform, maybe like a 210 457 and especially a Touareg 457 if we're lucky. Now, if you watched our track comparison, I said that this bike feels quite compact on the track, and thinking back to that, I think that compactness sensation comes in just how agile it is. On the street, this really isn't a compact machine. First of all, you've got this large, wide fuel tank. It not only feels wide, but also looks really good when you glance down at it. And then you've got these wide bars that give you that sense of being on a big bike. Room-wise, things aren't bad as well. On the track, I did feel like I wish there was a little more room for going all the way back, but nothing is an issue for me on the street, and I am 6 foot 1 inches tall. So this bike will fit most people. Seat height is 800 mm on paper, which is quite good, but really short riders, maybe someone below 5'6", might find themselves slightly on tiptoes. It's really not a tall motorcycle, but if a low seat is your main priority, then you want to look at the Japanese competition like the R3, Ninja 300, 400 and 500. Then there's the actual riding position itself, and I think Aprilia has found a nice middle ground here, tending slightly towards the sporty side. So this is more sporty than the likes of the R3 and the Ninja. Not as extreme as an R15. It's somewhere in the middle ground. You do feel like you're on a sporty motorcycle, but it's not extreme pain. Now, while the overall riding position is quite nicely judged, there is one unusual thing happening here. Most motorcycles have a heel plate along with their foot pegs, which is where you rest your heels. And if you go to a riding school, they teach you to grip the motorcycle with your heels to give you a better sense of feedback. On the Aprilia, your heels interface with the swing arm. That's an unusual experience because it lets you know how much the swing arm is working. You open the gas, something happens, you close the gas, you lean. It's constantly moving, and it's a strange sensation to engage with that. Now, honestly, on the racetrack, my mind was too occupied with committing to high speeds around the track to even notice that. And on the road, if you're not hugging it, it's absolutely fine. It's just a weird oddity. The seat is nice and flat. I like the shape. It is quite firm. A firm seat is nice on a sporty motorcycle in terms of feedback from the road, but the downside to that is that it gets painful on bad roads. Speaking of bad roads, the suspension on the bike is actually quite nice. Preload adjustable at both ends. I haven't felt the need to fiddle with the adjusters. The actual suspension does a pretty good job of soaking in bumps and impacts on the road. It doesn't feel harsh and doesn't feel like it's hammering through potholes. But because you're lean forward and this firm seat, the rear shock does tend to give you quite a bit of an impact to your lower back if you ride on bad roads, especially at higher speeds. That is something to keep in mind. Good roads, this is a perfectly comfortable motorcycle. Ultimately, it comes down to what sort of roads you ride on, but this bike has the potential to be a reasonably comfortable thing given what it is. Now, speaking about what it is, the handling, really good. Now, we've talked about this quite a bit on the track, but on the street, those qualities continue. It's a light, agile, reactive machine. The tires are very good, and you will have good fun on a good road. Interestingly, despite the fact that this is an agile, reactive machine, it deals with high-speed bumps really well. Now, you could hit something like a rut in the road or an unexpected pothole, and it soaks it in nicely. There's no threat of a big tank slapper or a big moment of instability, and that gives you more confidence in the bike. Okay, time to talk about one of the most anticipated things. How are these brakes on the street? If you remember from the track, we found that there was brake fade under repeated hard braking. Then we took it to coast for our track day, and Rajni reported no brake fade issues, and that makes sense because the coast circuit doesn't have repeated hard braking zones. So what's it like on the street? Well, honestly, it's mostly really quite good. Brake feel is nice, it's quite sharp, stops well, good feedback, and in our tests, again, the Aprilia outdid almost all of its competition from 60 to 0. Performance is good. To get the best performance though, you do need to turn off the rear ABS because otherwise you get too much ABS intervention. Turn it off and it stops really well. In fact, it lifts the rear wheel quite easily. However, later on, I did realize that if you really attack these brakes, think of continuous hard riding on a downhill ghat section, you can overheat them. In fact, I got lots of thick smoke coming off the pads and I had to ride ahead and cool it down. Once it did cool down, most of the performance came back and the brakes feel pretty much fine right now. But I think what we're looking at here is the fact that these pads cannot handle extreme braking. Most situations are all right, but if you want to take it to the track or if you're a really aggressive rider, you might want to look at better brake pads. Interestingly, Aprilia just did the international ride for this bike after the Indian ride, and the bikes for the international media were using race brake pads and nobody complained about the brakes. So that's one potential issue, but it only comes up in a very particular usage scenario. What about the rest of the bike? Are there any other major issues? Surprisingly, not really. I did notice that the TFT has a particular glitch that happens very occasionally where some of the elements pixelate. Now, initially I thought this was a hardware issue, but you just turn the key off, turn it back on, and that screen shows perfectly nicely. It seems to be a software issue and it seems to be something that Aprilia could fix. Very minor, you might not even notice it, but if you look closely, you might see that sometimes. Then there's the switch gear. Mostly these switches are quite good, but when you connect the Bluetooth system, which you do by downloading Aprilia's app, you'll find that you have to put quite a few key inputs, and sometimes there's not a lot of feedback coming off here. Now, speaking of the Bluetooth system, you get call alerts for incoming calls, missed calls. That is very nice. It also has navigation, which is powered by Here Maps. We found that the map system is not as detailed as Google Maps, and sometimes on the app you can't find that location that you want to pinpoint to. Another thing we noticed is that the directional arrows sometimes disappear on the screen and you can miss a turn. These are small things. If you like Bluetooth, that's something that might bother you. But in general, this is actually a really nice screen. It's laid out very well, easy to navigate through. Different pages show you different data. And if you just want to change the riding modes or change the ABS setting, it's all very easy to do. It's also a really nice screen to look at, inspired by the big Aprilia bikes, and it adds to the whole sensation of this being an expensive, special machine. On the topic of this feeling like a premium machine, again, most of it is really very good. Now, I have said before, I don't like the matte finishes, not just on this bike, but on most motorcycles. They don't age very well. So far, this is fine, but I would suggest you go for a gloss color, and right now there's only one gloss color. It's a very nice looking white. But beyond that, the plastics seem to be quite nice. The fit and finish is really quite good. There are a couple of things that I noticed. These bolts over here have a little bit of pitting on them and you do look at them quite often. So I'd like to see better quality bolts out here. I also noticed that this coloration on the frame seems to be fading a little on both sides. Weirdly enough, it's not where your knee normally goes. So this may have happened during transportation. I'm not sure what it is, but there is a possibility that this color can fade. So if you buy the bike, it might just be worthwhile to put a little bit of paint protection film just to keep things safe. As for rattles, well, we've ridden the bike long and hard, many days, many hundreds of kilometers, lots of bad roads. Nothing has rattled except for one thing. This can be annoying on bad roads, but thankfully I looked underneath and there are two small holes in the number plate bracket which don't seem to have been used. So perhaps if you run a bolt through there, it should fix the problem. Maybe Aprilia just hasn't set this up correctly, but it's the only rattle we found on the bike. That about sums up my drawbacks with this motorcycle, and really there are very few. Although there is one thing that has really slightly upset and annoyed me, and it's the fact that this motorcycle really deserves a quickshifter. Now, we have said that Aprilia is going to sell one as an accessory, but there's a catch there. We are told that that accessory is going to be an imported item and it will cost about 28,000 rupees. For a bike that costs just 4.1 lakhs, that's a lot of money. You could get something for big bikes, imported bikes, accessory quick shifters for similar money. We haven't tried it yet, so I can't tell you if it is any good. What I can tell you though is that the overall motorcycle is not just good, it's really very nice. This is a really impressive motorcycle. It's not just because it looks great or it sounds good or it goes really fast or it handles very well. It's because it all comes together to make for a very special feeling motorcycle. And to me, that is the best attribute that a bike can have. Now, Aprilia has done a tremendous job with making this motorcycle, but they do have a big task ahead of them, and that is to prove a quality, widespread sales and service network. As of now, we're told there will be about 35 dealers across the country that will sell and service this motorcycle. That number should grow over the year. Speaking of service, we're told that it will need a service every 6 months with an oil change every alternate service. Service costs should be slightly above the KTM service cost, so 5,000 to 7,000 rupees, we shall see. That only leaves the aspect of reliability. I can't tell you more than I have experienced so far. What I have experienced is good. There'll have to be more bikes on the road and there'll have to be more feedback from customers, but the bike does seem quite solid so far. Overall, at 4.1 lakh rupees, yes, I do think this is a slightly expensive motorcycle, and especially if you want that quick shifter. But the RS 457 gives you an experience that is more than worth that money. If you like a sporty motorcycle, highly, highly recommended.
The better, torn feathers, tough as leather, making cheddar. We listen to all the